My friends, you're in for a treat, or I'm in for a treat. I'm not really certain which way it's going to go, but today we're going to be looking at the art of the early Renaissance as it exists in Florence. And so, as a way for full disclosure, um, I have had during my middle-aged life, I suppose, opportunity to do quite a bit of travel. I'm an art historian, and so I'm very thankful for that. I've been hither and thither. I've been a lot of different places, and my favorite place on earth is Florence. And so we're going to look at some of the art and architecture that's present in my favorite place on the planet. And I give you an overhead view of Florence and then a detail of just a little part of it. One of the things that is fabulous about Florence compared to Rome to the south is how walkable and easy Florence is. When you arrive in Florence, you'll likely do so on a train. This is the train station here, although the train station is not from the Renaissance. It's actually named Santa Maria Novella after the church in which it's a front of. So there's the church, there's the train station. And in the summer of 19, when I brought some students here, I'll point this out to give you an idea of scale. We stayed at a hotel. It would have been right about there, right about here. So the Via Novella, because a straight walk up this road got you to the Medici Chapel, which we're not going to talk about in this class, but wow, that's fantastic. And going down to the corner and going straight here will get you to the cathedral. To give you an idea of time frame, the walk from there to there is about a minute and a half, and the walk from there to there is about 3 minutes. So Florence is a remarkably walkable place. And I'll bring your attention to a couple of other places that we're going to be looking at in the course of today's class. So we will no doubt look at the cathedral. I'll mention the Campanile, which was designed by Giotto, and we'll talk about the baptistry doors. We'll do a little bit of work here just off the screen at the Bargello, which is a former prison where there's some really fabulous art making now. Santa Maria Novella is where there is a couple of really great paintings. And I've only been there maybe 2 or 3 times, but I went back this time, so maybe 3 times now. But we'll look at the Brancacci Chapel here in Santa Maria del Carmine, where there's some really another great painting by Masaccio. So let me show you a picture of the Florentine skyline, and I'll show you where I took this picture. So it might have been New Year's Day in 2012. For a variety of bizarre reasons, I had the occasion to walk up here by myself. And so up here is a gigantic church, and there's a piazza here called Piazza Michelangelo up there. And from here, you can see both the river that runs through the city. The river is the Arno, but also some of the major monuments of Florence itself. And so this right here is a church called Santa Croce. Santa Croce is over here. This is the cathedral there, including the Campanile or bell tower. And this is the Piazza Pubblico. So we'll look at some of these buildings, but here's your postcard view of the cathedral in Florence. The cathedral itself was begun in 1296 by an Italian Gothic architect, by Arfano da Campo, and it was only completed 150 years later when Brunelleschi was able to figure out how to do this dome. We're not going to talk about that today. We have other fish to fry. But I wanted to show you a picture. Let me move this over a little bit. This is a picture taken from this tower here of the baptistry down below. So this is the front of the church. This is the baptistry, and there's another picture of the baptistry. And this is a group of tourists standing in front of the baptistry on a slightly rainy day in, I think this was a March. The baptistry is one of the oldest surviving buildings in Florence. It dates from the early 11th century, and around the year 1405, there was a guild in Florence that wanted to put new doors on the baptistry. And there are four sets of doors. There's a pair of doors there, actually three sets, and over here. And so they had kind of a competition. And the goal of the competition was to figure out who could make the most visually interesting doors, but also do so at the cheapest price. And so the call for competition involved sculptors creating a relief statue of the sacrifice of Isaac. So everyone was given the same subject, the sacrifice of Isaac, and everyone was given the same space constraint, and that is they were to make it in the shape of a quatrefoil. This is a quatrefoil. It is essentially a diamond with half circles on each of the sides. It's called a quatrefoil. And so this was the competition panel by a sculptor and later architect, Filippo Brunelleschi. And I mentioned his name a second ago. He's the architect who designed this. But early on, in 1401, he had aspirations to be a sculptor. And so this was his attempt of creating a scene of the sacrifice of Isaac. I want to point out some things here. One, this is cast in bronze, and it's cast out of 5 separate pieces of bronze, all sort of welded together. And what we have here is a striding forward Abraham. Abraham has gripped Isaac by the throat. He has a knife in his hand, and the angel has swooped in, has grabbed Abraham from the front to stop him from killing him. Isaac here is shown largely nude. He looks like he has on a pair of like boxer briefs. And there are other elements around this object that provide a place of setting, but also align this with the art of the classical world. So let's start with some of those things. To begin with, Abraham is striding forward with a sense of contrapposto that honestly is kind of new. I mean, not new, it's been rediscovered. It's something that architects and sculptors are revitalizing. Over here is a young man seated. He's brought one foot up upon the other knee, and he's pulling a thorn out of it. This is a work of Hellenistic sculpture that Brunelleschi is putting back into his work. It's kind of a throwback. It's a, you know, a little bit of nostalgia. It shows his awareness of classical art, and something similar is happening here. So this is good. It's good. It shows the narrative. It is somewhat tension filled, although we get the idea that the angel's going to win the arm wrestling competition. But this was Brunelleschi's submission for this contest. Now, to be fair, there were at least 7 submissions that we know about. We only have 2 of the panels, but this is the other one. And this was a sculptor made by a sculptor, a trained gold and silversmith by the name of Lorenzo Gilberti. And this is his sacrifice of Isaac. And again, done about the same time frame. And this is a little bit different. To begin with, there's a greater sense of tension, I would suggest to you, in this object than in the other ones. And you might be thinking, well, how? And I'd say, well, in this one, in Brunelleschi's on the left, we feel relatively certain that the angel is going to save the day. He's already grabbed Abraham by the wrist. But in the other one, the angel is swooping in, and we're just not certain yet. And so the story from the Jewish Bible, and I'm going to paraphrase now because I can't quote scripture without the Bible in front of me. God says to Abraham, you know what, Abraham, you've been a good guy and you've done all the things I've asked you to do for me. There's only one thing left to prove your devotion, and that is I want you to take your son to the mountaintop, make an altar, and then kill him. And this is not the kind of words you want to hear as a dad. I say this as the father of two young boys. They drive me bananas sometimes, but I've never really wanted to stab them. And so, but also God hasn't told me to do that either. So So I guess if God speaks, you got to listen. But Abraham does all of that. And at the moment when Abraham is about to do it, God sends an angel in to tell Abraham that God was just testing and that instead now he can sacrifice a ram that is hidden in the thicket. Here you can see the ram and the thicket. Here you can see the ram and the thicket. And so the Gilberti image on the right-hand side has a little bit more drama with it because we don't quite know. We know from the story, but we don't quite know whether or not the angel is going to swoop in time. There's something else at play here. Now, both of these figures have a sense of contrapposto or weight shift, and that's fabulous, and that makes us happy because the Renaissance, or as my Australian professor at the University of Maryland would say, the Renaissance is a rebirthing of the ideals, both intellectual and artistic, from the classical past. And so one of the things that the classical past did without any sense of guilt or regret whatsoever was the depiction of both the male and female nude. They all the naked people we saw in Greece and Rome. That was no problem. Like it's okay, right? Like that was a perfectly acceptable form of art. But during the medieval world, nudity was thought to be inherently sinful. And I showed this to you a little while ago. Let me zap back and show you again. I showed you the Ghent altarpiece, right? And here's Adam from the Ghent altarpiece and Eve from the Ghent altarpiece. And please note how they're covering themselves up, right? This medieval idea that nudity is somehow inherently sinful, but Gilberti doesn't show him that way. He shows him like he's a Greek guy. And so this, in a lot of ways, signifies this shift of the embrace of the classical past, even if it seemed to be forbidden by the medieval world. And, my last year at Maryland, there was someone who should not have been teaching at the University of Maryland, but teaching a class at the University of Maryland. And she said, when talking about this is the first male nude in the Renaissance. It is, but whoop-de-doo, the Renaissance has been going on for like 8 minutes. This isn't the first male nude in the Renaissance. Well, it is. It's the first male nude since classical antiquity. That's the big deal. This was not the kind of thing that we saw in medieval art. I'll wait. Go find a book on medieval art and find a naked person. And the only naked people you might find are Adam and Eve before the fall. But beyond that, we were clothed because our bodies were thought to be sinful. And so these two competition panels survived. 5 others existed at one point, and Gilberti won. And he won for a couple of reasons. And we're happy he won, right? We're happy for Gilberti, and we get happy for Brunelleschi in time too. But Gilberti won because he was able to capture a sense of drama that maybe Brunelleschi's lack. But maybe as importantly, he cast this from 3 pieces of bronze rather than 5. And as a result, when you weigh them, it weighs about 30% less. And 30% less when you're dealing with 500 pounds of bronze is a lot of money. And so Gilberti went on to become one of the great sculptors of his or anyone else's day. And Brunelleschi was so angry that he pouted, left Florence, went to Rome with one of his buddies whose name was Donatello, and he spent like 8 years just measuring buildings. And at the end of all that, he came back to Florence and did that and did a lot of other stuff as well. So these 2 art makers, one went on to become one of the great sculptors of his day, and the other one went to be one of the great architects of his day, and life worked out well for both of them. The doors were commissioned by the Wool Carders Guild, right? A carder is someone who deals with wool. And so these are the doors of the North Baptistry. They're now inside in the museum on the other side of the cathedral, and you can see they take on the same shape. Originally, they were gilded, and they have primarily the life of Christ on them. And so this, my friends, is the flagellation of Christ. And look at this contrapposto. It makes me want to clap. I'm so happy we have contrapposto. Hooray, Christ standing, weight-bearing leg, non-weight-bearing leg, with a couple of people whipping him into submission. This is the Annunciation. It's one of many Annunciations we'll see over the next couple of artifacts. Our angel swooping in, Mary, with this elegant contrapposto sway that is right out of the high classical. It makes us really happy. So hooray. Gilberti goes on to do these doors cast in bronze. The doors on the north side now are replicas. The originals are inside of the museum. People were so happy with Gilberti when he finally finished them that they asked him to do another set of doors, and these were placed on the east side of the baptistry, and these were so beautiful, so overwhelming, that Michelangelo himself, and again, if we were to make a list of top 5 sculptors, like the all-time great sculptors, I don't know if Michelangelo is number 1. Oh gosh, I love Rodin. I love Bernini. I don't know if he's number 1, but he's not number 4, right? He's 1, 2, or 3. So let's just call Michelangelo. We'll just say he's good. He's good. And he said they were so beautiful that the gates to heaven couldn't be more so. So these have been called the gates of paradise. And again, the originals are in the museum. The ones outside are replicas. And they're a little bit different. Now I pause here to point out the dates. From 1403 to 1424, Gilberti worked on the north doors. From 1425 to 1452, he worked on the east doors. And this means for a period of 49 years, Gilberti nearly devoted himself to 2 works of art, the casting of 2 sets of doors for the baptistry in Florence. 49 years. Raise your hand if you're 49 years old yet. And I'm still 5 years away from raising my hand. Like, that's a long time. Now, to be fair, Gilberti does other things, right? But this is the big thing. And looking at these 2 doors, you can see some interesting changes. And it speaks to the change in art in Florence, and one might suggest the world, between, say, 1400 and 1450. And I give you this object here. This is Isaac and his sons. It's part of the East doors. And you might notice something about it. What has Gilberti learned between the first set of the doors and the second set of doors? Because let me just go back for a second. Here's our Annunciation again. And then here's that. Hasn't he learned, and this is a big word, and we'll have to explain it in a second, but hasn't he learned perspective? One of the great developments of the middle part, the middle third, yeah, it's called the middle third of the is the development of 1-point linear perspective. And this object has that linear perspective. We have a vanishing point. We have a realistic rendering of 3-dimensional space on something mostly flat. And so Gilberti has figured it out. He put his self-portrait on the door. I love it. It's like a little door knocker. I really dig the head. There's his son. I mean, you get to put your son on doors too. This is the Ark of the Covenant. And so there's the Ark of the Covenant, which I really love because I'm a Raiders of the Lost Ark kind of guy. Again, another scene of the sacrifice of Isaac. And here the angel once again sort of swooping in. And again, an all nude, tastefully done, but all nude Isaac. More perspective and vanishing point. Contrapposto. I mean, this, my friends, is a weight shift. This is looking back to the classical past. So Gilberti goes on to do all of that. Brunelleschi does something else. And on the south side of the cathedral is this statue. Here you can say, it says, Filippo Brunelleschi made it. And he's looking up, isn't he? He's looking up. He's drawn the cathedral. And that's what he's got. And so all in all, things worked out okay for Brunelleschi. he designed the cathedral, the dome of the cathedral, that ended up being such a prominent part of the skyline of Florence. I want to talk a little bit about a painting now, and I give you two things. I give you a tour group from Clark College in 2009 in front of the facade of this church. The church is called Santa Maria Novella. The facade, the front facade, was made from 1458 to 1470 by an architect, drawer, all around excellent dude named Leon Battista Alberti. He's one of the guys who rediscovers and perfects the art and act of one-point linear perspective. The facade dates from the middle of the 15th century. The church itself is from the 12th century. So the church itself, in many ways, is a kind of Gothic building. And what Alberti did is put a Renaissance front on it. This would be kind of like it would be like putting new cabinet doors on old cabinets, right? You might make the cabinet look newer, but you're not changing any of the problems that the old cabinet has. And there's no real problems with the church, but it's just a front facing of it. And in that church, there is this painting. It is a fresco by an art maker named Masaccio, and it's called the Holy Trinity. The painting itself dates from 1428, the Holy Trinity. And it is bigger than you think it is. It dates from 1428. And there's all kinds of interesting things about this composition that will allow us to lend some light on what it meant to be in Florence during the 15th century. First of all, let's talk about who it is we see. There are a bunch of people present here, right? We have Jesus, we have God the Father, and between them, we have the dove of the Holy Spirit. In the next space, we have Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Saint John the Beloved over here. In the space that's closest to us, we have the two patrons. He's a gondoliere, which is a banner carrier, right? He's a member of the Florence City Council. I think there were two of them every year. You did 2-year term. Being elected to this was a great, great honor. And so he's been shown in this holy space. Christ and God are arranged in this barrel vault. And we've seen a barrel vault before, right? It's an arch that extends through space. We have Ionic columns here, Corinthian pilasters there. We have a step here, another step there, and underneath it, flanked by Corinthian pilasters on the left and right, we have a sarcophagus, and I'll show you a detail in a second. And on the sarcophagus is a depiction of a skeleton, and there's an inscription in Latin on it that says, "I am what you will be, and I was what you were." And this, my friends, is a reminder of death. It's just a reminder that at one time I was alive just like you are, and in time you will be bones like me. This is in a public space. It's not in a private home. It's not like Duccio's little Madonna and Child. This is a big thing. It's 22 feet high. I pause here to say that's 3 of me and all of my 5-year-old son stacked on top of one another. This is about eye level. So this is an enormous work of art, and I have better images of it, which I should incorporate into this discussion because it's been cleaned and it now looks fabulous. Masaccio has completed this object with such an attention to the depiction of space and perspective that it almost is perfect. And I'm going to give you a big fancy word. The big fancy word is orthogonal. 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 And an orthogonal is an imaginary line established by architecture that all converge at a vanishing point. Now, we use architecture for these orthogonals because buildings usually don't move. And so, for example, do you see this capital here? The capital has a front edge, the capital has a back edge, and I'll show you a detail in a second. Front edge to back edge, 2 points determine a line. You can extend a line through space. So the same is true here. Front edge, back edge, draw a line, extend it through space. This one here, extend it through space. And then we have this coffered barrel vault. You've seen coffers before. Remember the Pantheon. So where did Brunelleschi go? Let me think about that. Where'd he go? He went, oh, right. He went to Rome. Do you think he went to Rome and didn't go into the Pantheon? I don't think so. I think he went to the Pantheon. So we have those coffers. And if you were to draw a line down the middle of one of those coffers and extend it down and do that for all of the coffers, all of those lines, the lines from the Capitol, the lines from the coffers, guess what's going to happen? Those things are going to converge at the same spot. And just take a second and look. What is that same spot? Where do they go? They go right there. Now, I haven't done anything super fancy, right? I'm not like a Photoshop whiz kid. I've just made the lines in PowerPoint and tried to make them straight, right? So this line, I put it in the middle of the coffer. I extended it down through the middle of the coffer. Same here on the capitals. It's perfect. It gets us right to the vanishing point. The vanishing point is usually about eye level for your average viewer and is generally in a place of particular compositional importance. The Holy Trinity magically captures all of that. This is perfect. Now you might be wondering, why are the patrons there? And it's actually a pretty simple answer, but maybe a disappointing one as well when we think about do not know what the left hand is doing when you're giving charity. I mean, I think Christ says something about charity. He's like, do not let the left hand know what the right hand is doing. And that is, be charitable, but don't do it to promote yourself. And Bob here and his wife, Susie, were very much interested in doing it as a way of promoting themselves because they put themselves in the painting. And so, I mean, again, think about the company. Like, so at Louisiana Tech, I'll say this is kind of funny. At Louisiana Tech, there is a little sculpture garden with a bunch of heads, bronze heads. And let me see if I can get all the bronze heads right. There's Martin Luther King Jr., there is Anne Frank, there's Voltaire, and there's Einstein. And then there are 2 Louisiana Tech presidents. Like, isn't that funny? It's like Einstein, perhaps the most famous physicist ever, winner of the Nobel Prize. Martin Luther King, winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. Anne Frank, a symbol of the indomitable human spirit. And then Voltaire, creator of wonderful French dramas. Now he seems to be the outcast to me. And then you have the 2 tech presidents, which I think is really hysterical. In this we have who's present? God, Holy Spirit, Jesus, Mary, and St. John, and then 2 people from Florence. It kind of sets up a certain expectation. But the patron said something very smart about this, and it survives in one of his letters. And he said, I paid for this work of art to praise and glorify my God, to praise and glorify my city, and to praise and glorify myself. That this was not just an object meant to beautify a church, but because he could have beautified a church and not put his head on it, right? It was to do all of that work for him as well. And so this object does work for him as well as for his church and well as beautifying his city. And those are all very important ideas. Masaccio's painting, which is one of the first real true expressions of linear perspective in the Renaissance is so important. And Masaccio sadly dies very, very young. But another one of his great works is A Short Walk Away. And I got to tell you, when you go there, don't give up on it. And to be honest, the courtyard looks a little bit better now, but this is the front of the church. And I've never actually been in this part of the church because you get into the chapel by coming in this way. But this is Santa Maria del Carmine. And again, this is Santa Maria Novella. And if you walk straight down, like this road right here is kind of like the Rodeo Drive of Florence. So all of the expensive like clothing makers. I mean, I bought a watch for a band for my watch at the Omega store over here. If you walk down this road and cross this river, you'll eventually get to Santa Maria del Carmine. The church isn't much to look like on the outside, but the inside is absolutely fabulous. And what I want to show you now is a small little chapel there called the Brancacci Chapel. And it's hard to take a picture of it because you can't get far enough away really to get everything in it. And I should look at the pictures I took recently because I was here with students in 2019, and this picture is probably from 2000 well, golly, I don't really know, maybe 2009. And I feel like they've done a lot of restoration work on it. But behind me in this picture is just a really fabulous interior of a church that you can't take pictures of, sadly. But this is the Brancacci Chapel in Santa Maria del Carmine. It dates from 1426 to 27, but was finished in 1428. And it was done by two art makers, Masolino, who is okay, and Masaccio, who is his student, who's really good. And so the entire series of paintings honors or it commemorates mostly St. Peter. And I want to show you the difference between Masolino on the left here and Masaccio on the right, because this gives you an idea of good versus great. So, and you can make out Masolino there and Masaccio here. So most of the paintings, I think all of the paintings actually, of the series of Peter are by Masaccio. So here is the Garden of Eden. You have Adam here standing all nude. There's no sin yet, so hooray for that. And Eve. And this is Satan, who has quite literally been shown as having the head of a woman. So if you ever wonder why we live in a patriarchal world, I give you the fact that it's Eve's fault allegedly for original sin, and here the devil has the head of a woman on it. And so here we have before the fall, and here we have them after the fall. This is the expulsion of the Garden of Eden. And this is Masaccio in his earliest days. Some of the paintings in the Brancacci Chapel date from a couple of years later. But think about the volume, the depth, the space of these bodies, and the way in which he has so effectively conveyed the shame, the embarrassment, the sorrow of the biggest mistake of anyone's life ever. Because now they're aware of their nakedness, and here they're being expelled by Saint Matthew, or by the angel Matthew on the way out of paradise. This is the painting as you see it in real life. There's Masaccio's expulsion, and this painting is called the Tribute Money. And again, it's a fresco and it's big, right? So I don't know how long that is. 15 feet. That's my guess, 15 feet. And this is a really interesting example of an art maker using one panel to do a couple different parts of the same narrative. As a matter of fact, this has 3 different scenes from the same narrative. The middle part of the narrative shows Jesus's approach to Capernaum with his apostles. And when he's about to enter the city, he's approached by a tax collector. And the tax collector says that in order to enter the city, he needs to pay taxes. And Jesus doesn't have any money. And so Jesus tells St. Peter, he said, I need you to go to the Sea of Galilee and go fishing. And St. Peter was a fisherman, so this would be a good job for Peter, right? So go fishing. And the first fish you pull from the lake, from the sea, will have the tax. And so here in this image, Jesus is pointing over there, and Peter says, over there, and Jesus says, yes, over there. And so here's Peter over there. He's fishing. That's scene number 2. He's removed part of his garment, and he's now fishing, pulling the fish from the big drink. And over here, there's the tax collector, right, dressed as if he's Mercutio from a rousing rendition of Romeo and Juliet. And over here is St. Peter, who is paying our tight-wearing tax collector. So this one painting has 3 different depictions, and I joked about the Santa Claus fresco beard, and here it is. All right. Orthogonals, again, orthogonals are established by imaginary lines, usually created by architecture that converge at a place of particular compositional importance. And so if we were to think about this painting, and we have architecture, right? You got building over here. Where might those imaginary lines be? And where might they converge? Because I think if you were to take a second and really look at it, you might come to a very interesting idea. So I want you to look, and while you're doing that, I want to tell you about another form of creating space. We talked about one-point linear perspective, right? Lines creating one point that converge to help establish space, one-point linear perspective. But Masaccio in this is using another kind of linear perspective, another kind of perspective. This is called atmospheric perspective. Atmospheric perspective is not something that Masaccio invented or created. It's just something that he used to remarkably good effect, and some artists who will follow, Leonardo, will be the same way. So atmospheric perspective merely goes with the belief in optics, and that things that are farther away from us are less clear and a little more cloudy, a little more hazy. This is exactly how our eyes work, right? Our eyes have a kind of depth of field that if you're looking at a coffee cup on your desk, the bookshelf behind you is not in focus at the same time. It's how our eyes work. If I'm looking at a student in the first row, I can't see what the student in the last row is doing unless I look at them. So our eyes do not have an infinite depth of field, and Masaccio paints this object that way. Everything in the background is a bit more gray, a bit more hazy, and a bit less clear. That, my friends, is atmospheric perspective. All right, so let's look. I said to you that there's a vanishing point. Where might that be? Where could it be established? Because if we were to draw orthogonals on the basis of the architectural elements in the upper part of this composition, I think you could get to this, right? And again, I've done nothing real fancy. All I've done is created straight lines from the architecture and converged them here around the point of Christ's hands. That is a vanishing point. But you might have had a different one. You might have thought of a different place of compositional importance. You might have used different lines. And if you did that from the lower part, congratulations. You have found the ways in which Masaccio has utilized not one point, but a kind of two-point linear perspective to take our eyes to 2 different places. And both of those places are really important. Place number 1, the hand of Christ that is telling Peter where to go. And thing number 2, the halo atop Christ's head. So Masaccio, well, golly, Masaccio's got game. He totally understands how to manipulate us as viewers. And I haven't said this before, but I love saying it, so let me say it now. Art makers are manipulators. They are able to use all of the tricks in their artistic bag to have us think certain things and have our eyes go certain places. And if you're the type of 17-year-old to sit in front of me today and say, there's no way an art maker can manipulate me, I say, look at your clothing, think about your shoes, Somehow Hollister has gotten 18-year-olds to believe that they should spend $40 on a t-shirt. And if you don't think that's become some kind of art maker, you need to wake up and smell the Sanka, my friends, because advertising is entirely art makers trying to manipulate us. I mean, like, oh my gosh. So I am recording this on a, what is today? Today's a Tuesday. And on the Saturday before, Nike released a version of the Air Jordan 3 that I had when I was in eighth grade. It's actually an updated version based on the original sketch of the shoemaker who designed it. His name was Tinker Hatfield. Tinker Hatfield. And the original design for the Air Jordan 3 had a swoosh on it. Jordan got rid of the swoosh. He didn't want it on the shoe. But this is a version of that shoe with a swoosh on it. And when I knew that that was coming out, I was on my phone at 8:45 waiting for 9 o'clock so I could jump in line, the digital line, for that shoe. And that shoe was $200. And I'm delighted. Take my money, Nike. But if you don't think that was me being manipulated, I spent $200 on a shoe that when I was in eighth grade cost half as much, you are mistaken. Art makers manipulate us, and Masaccio has led our eyes in a certain path and a certain way to get there. I want to call your attention to one final work of art. Masaccio dies when he's really young. I don't think he's yet 30. But I wanted to show this to you because it's fabulous and because we'll come back to St. John the Beloved in a little while. This is a small crucifixion painting. And in it, we have Mary, Mary Magdalene, St. John the Beloved, and over here, a Jesus who really, unfortunately, does not seem to have a neck. And I want to call your attention to this guy here, St. John. I want you to think about how you would describe St. John. You don't have to tell me. I can't hear you anyway. We're not even in the same room. I want you to think about how you would describe St. John, and we'll come back to him later. One final work of Masaccio for you, and then we're going to get rolling, is this. It's a Madonna and Child. It dates around 1426, although I think it now might be dated a year or so later. And I want you to think about this in regards to space. Like, look at this lap of Mary. Woo-ha! In 130 years, we went from Mary having no lap at all to a really fantastic lap. In a lot of and there's other really cool things about this painting, for example, like look at this little baby Jesus. Like, I'll show you a detail here. Like, look at little baby Jesus. Little baby Jesus is doing what a lot of little babies do. He's sucking on his hand. Like, this is a sense of humanity. This is baby Jesus being baby Jesus. Like big word baby, right? Like Jesus was a baby once, right? Like I wonder if he played with toys, sucked his thumb, threw his plate across the room when he got angry and he didn't want another banana. Like, this is a really human rendering of Jesus. This isn't the I'm blessing you even though I'm 2 years old Jesus. This is not the I'm reading a book. Can you read baby Jesus? This is a baby Jesus. This interest in the humanity of the nuts and bolts of being a human being is something that the Renaissance is going to run with. So in this artifact, we primarily looked at the art of Florence. We talked about the baptistry doors, and we talked about Masaccio painting in fresco for churches and tempera on wood panels for private commissions. Our next artifact, we're going to take a plane trip, and we're going to go from here, where we've been, there, to up here, to what is now mostly modern day Belgium. Coming up next, the art of the early Northern Renaissance.